Hello, I'm Chloe Alexander and I'm a research fellow at the University of Birmingham. I'm part of the Centre for Care. I'm going to be presenting on the arts-based methods that I used doing research with young carers and their families. So I wanted to put kind of set the scene for where these research methods came from. I was doing my PhD research on young carers and family life, and there were a couple of kind of key questions that were guiding me. So I wanted to explore what an ethnography of family life contributed to the understanding of young carers, so ethnography being a particular methodology. And I was also interested in this question about our policies on young carers reaching families and what is the impact, and looking at the connections between using an ethnographic method and understanding this kind of policy reach into family life. And as part of the research, ethnography led me to use participant observation, so these kind of visits to families over time, but also I wanted to use arts-based methods as well, and thinking about that as a visual ethnography. So I developed two drawing-based activities and one that was book recommendations, so kind of engaging with fiction. The first drawing activity that I wanted to explain is these space drawings. So I asked the question of families, how would your family care for each other in space? And each family member was given paper, pencils, pens, and asked to respond to that and play around with that question and visualize it. So here are two examples from one family. On one side, we've got a young carer's drawing, that's the pencil drawing. And on the other side, we've got her sister's drawing, and she was labelled as a young person as having special educational needs. And the young carer's drawing, to talk about that first, I think it, drawing on the kind of what I knew about those families from spending time with them and knowing those relationships, I found that she was recreating the kind of family relationships and the kind of representing her family almost moved to this new environment, and kind of being playful and joking about the things that characterize them and how they would still be there in space. And she's represented herself apart from the family group and given her sister and her parents symbols or phrases that marked them out as who they were. So for her, care was something that really kind of related very strongly to those personalities and would kind of re-emerge in this kind of fantasy landscape. But then her sister has focused more on this kind of journey and this adventure and this possibility of change. So she's kind of turned their family house into a space rocket, and off they go. And they're gathered together, and they look excited, and it looks like a fun kind of process. And is maybe a bit more ambiguous about how care would be if things were different. The other type of drawing that I introduced was using tracing paper. And I offered up a kind of selection of themes for each family that were based on topics that had come up when we talked about care. And the family members were each given a piece of tracing paper and asked to respond to that theme and kind of represent their experiences and what happened. So then those drawings could be brought together as a kind of collective response, but sometimes they kind of harmonized, other times they kind of clashed and were more awkward. And I thought of the contrast between these two drawing methods. One, the space drawings is more of a kind of visual interview. One person is being asked to respond, another person is being asked to respond separately to the same kind of themes and topics. Whereas these tracing paper drawings were more of a kind of visual focus group. That's one way I thought about them, because you're also looking at the dynamic and the way that people thought about what it meant to bring their answers together. The third arts-based method that I wanted to talk about is not drawing-based, but is about literature and fiction. So, and also about kind of reference books. So some of my participants have started recommending books for me to read. And so I thought this was something I could also share with other individuals and other families that were part of my study. So participants were asked to provide recommendations for books that I should read, so I had a wider understanding and also could reflect something of their own kind of fiction reference points or book reference points. And I thought it was an interesting kind of counterpoint as well to more traditional bibliography. So this is an example here, kind of an extract from the form that I shared with my participants, and a young person with autism, a book that he and his mother read. He'd found it helpful to put that autism diagnosis in context and think about how they lived with it and what it was and what it meant to him. So he recommended that I read that book as well. So taking those methods together, thinking about what the benefits were of using those methods, what it brought to my study, I think firstly it kind of gave a change of tempo, a kind of different rhythm to the research, because it was an ethnography. I was spending quite a lot of time with these families repeatedly. I was conscious that that might seem like it was doing the same thing again and again. So this was something different, and hopefully more engaging as well. It might have engaged different participants who were maybe stayed in the background a little bit more during the discussions. And it had the potential, I thought, to alter power dynamics in comparison with other methods. So particularly thinking about the young people and the children in the study, that they might feel more confident, or it might suit certain people who enjoy arts and kind of more visual forms of communication. It also introduced new themes and ways of thinking about care, as well as just a different type of data. And it really emphasised to me relationality and temporality as important questions in my study in relation to care. So what is this future of care, and how does that exist for these families and these individuals, the kind of possibilities that they might think about or have that kind of potential in their lives. And also that there's a divergence of experience in the context of the same care activity, that while something's going on, people are experiencing it in different ways. It has different meaning, which might be made explicit and talked about, or it might be kept more private, but this maybe brought that out somewhat. And I think it alerted me to the visual kind of elements that were around and the emotion that held to people, because it made me more, it kind of tuned me into that there were arts-based objects already in those families, and that I could kind of be part of that as well as be part of other elements of their life. And it kind of seemed to emphasize more issues about housing, about comfort, about safety, in the absence of those things. So it was trying to add to the idea that the visual world can have a presence in qualitative research and do something different. And then I think it's gone on to be a source of a new way of disseminating my research and engaging different people. At the same time, there were definitely challenges to taking on this approach. I felt quite daunted by developing these exercises and the responsibility to make it clear what I was expecting of people and to support them to take part, to make it kind of rewarding and enjoyable. I was lucky that my participants were kind of quite enthusiastic about it, and also were quite helpful in pointing out where I needed to bring more clarity. And so they kind of worked with me on it. And that kind of built on the relationship we already had, I suppose. There were ethical issues, which I thought about to some extent in advance, but new issues came up as it developed. So the intention was that by using drawing rather than photography, for instance, I was giving more protection for people's anonymity and confidentiality. But people still used ways of marking out who family members were, which I then had to deal with. So this example here shows an image where I've edited it to remove the initials that the person had added, so that it didn't kind of name anyone and didn't kind of risk any of that anonymity. It was also about thinking about making sure that participants felt treated respectfully, and especially I was maybe felt there might be a bit of sensitivity with adults because of the connotations of drawing, its association with childhood and education. It might seem that I was not kind of giving them that kind of adult status. There were different questions about ownership, legal issues, and giving credit for the production of these materials. There's a different framework for kind of ownership in relation to arts materials. So I had to revisit people's kind of consent and talk that through with people. But people have their pseudonyms attached to those drawings in some cases. And the analysis was really was challenging. I had to rethink what it meant to analyze data and find new ways to establish the meaning and the kind of relevance of those materials to my findings. But it's been that has actually kind of opened up new areas of contribution to the work I was doing. And also, I hope that it's something I'll continue to think about is sharing the data in a way that feels respectful. So it's not like tokenistic. It's not there as just to decorate my slides. It's also about respecting that as data in its own way. Here are a few of the resources that I found helpful to kind of guide my thinking and a bit more of my writing about this method. Thank you.